I'm Holly Tankersley, Associate Dean in the College of Humanities and Fine Arts at Coastal Carolina University. I'm going to be talking about the U.S. presidency in general and contrasting the way that we look at presidents versus the presidency, and understanding then how it is that the election plays to or may shape or change the institution itself after someone, of course, is elected.
My name is Drew Kurlowski. I'm an assistant professor of politics here at Coastal Carolina, and I'll be discussing election laws and election rules, looking at both the primary elections and how a lot of these rules that govern registration or who may vote have really affected the outcomes, and then looking forward to the general election, and again, how registration laws, ballot access, and things like this really affect our outcomes.
I'm Kyle Holliday. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Communication, Media, and Culture. I'll be talking about the election from a political communication perspective, specifically media effects. So basically how we come to understand the presidency or an election process through the media and how our opinions are formed by that.
My name is Christian Smith. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English. I'll be looking at the current election cycle from a rhetorical orientation, specifically Aristotle's notions of epideictic, forensic, and deliberative rhetoric.
It's been an exciting one to talk about, right? I love the fact that all of a sudden we're relevant again. You know, every 4 years, people decide to take a look. The news coverage has been good, but although I really don't think there are many rules or laws of politics, if you could say anything about 2016, I think it's that this has been the election to break all of those rules.
Absolutely.
I think we're seeing very unique characters on both sides, right? Unfavorable ratings that are unprecedented for both of the candidates. And the media has had a huge impact, and I think in a very unique way. Social media we're seeing. So I really do think it's one of those elections where we're seeing sort of we're breaking the mold with this one, maybe. I don't know.
And I think that's true in a number of ways, including the idea that we have seen a shift in American politics, and presidential politics in particular, where people now are said to govern as they campaign. And having such an unusual campaign, I think, raises questions for individuals, for voters, for political experts, for politicians about whether or not such an unusual campaign would in fact translate to unusual governance. That raises a whole set of questions about what a Trump presidency would look like versus a Clinton presidency, and I think is terribly interesting to consider in this context.
In the past, usually the candidates who are running, part of what makes this a unique process is that it began so long ago. So it took a long time to even realize who the candidates are, who they were going to be. But in the past, the candidates have tried to manipulate or massage or tried to change what the media is talking about and subsequently what we hear about and what we think about. So in the past, for example, somebody like now Secretary, then at the time Senator Kerry, was accused of being a flip-flopper, and so he had to respond to that, and he had to respond to the war veterans who were complaining about him or who were on his side. Whereas now it seems like we don't know exactly what the media is going to have to cover. There tends to be scandals on either side or things that you don't expect a presidential candidate to say even on either side. And so the media has been a really important part of this campaign season in a way that they haven't been before. It's been very interesting.
From my own point of view, I think it's interesting to see how social media and digital technologies have increased the sort of pressure that's put on candidates, and how the narrative that was once sort of monolithic is now seen as fractured and controllable and constructed in a way that I don't think has been seen in previous elections.
It is interesting, though. There's a new Pew report out that discussed how the candidates use social media in different ways. And one of the things that Trump does that's unique is that Trump actually engages in his audience, like what social media is supposed to do, rather than crafting the news story, putting out the press release.
Sure.
And then again, someone actually pulled down all the data and looked to see if they could decide what's a Trump tweet and what's a staffer tweet.
Oh, yeah.
And they figured so Trump is using I think Trump is using an Android, and his staff is using an iPhone, so they can actually tell.
I can see
So here's what Trump is saying very specifically, and it's interesting. It's the first time that you think about really trying to control the message.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. I think the Clinton campaign is a paragon of control, and everything's in house, even the press releases, the news.
Right.
And Trump is just uncontrollable. Again, maybe going to yours a little bit, and also thinking we were talking about priming and framing these media effects, and it's I think too with Trump especially thinking about setting the agenda. Well, I mean the media has put Trump front and center and told us that he is an important figure, right, through that coverage.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to me how willing the news agencies are, especially on TV, to engage with him when he says something controversial, and then they say, well, why don't you explain it? And he calls in. Very few other candidates have that ability to call in instead of actually be on camera. They'll still put him live. But it's been very interesting to me that he can say something controversial, and then they say, well, why don't you respond or maybe explain yourself? And often he doubles down and says, no, that's what I meant.
That's exactly what I meant.
That's not a lot of other candidates in the past have had that ability to keep the attention of the media the way that he has.
That's true.
Sure.
I think that's sort of his appeal, his ethos, is that he is the quote unquote straight shooter, and his audience sees him as sort of unambiguous in a lot of ways, and that sort of puts in stark contrast the nuances of the left, and how a lot of the left often see issues as overly complex or appropriately complex and difficult in a way that he sort of goes straight to it.
And it goes to also these kind of questions of presidential paradoxes. A couple of presidential scholars in political science have written extensively about presidential paradoxes, and one of those is that we want a president who is charismatic but also very steady, and that those two things don't always go together. And so how do we as citizens and voters work out those differences, kind of our desires that seem to be contradictory?
And that reminds me, I said before that Secretary Kerry was accused of being a flip-flopper. Well, in response, he actually said, well, I just changed my mind when I learned new things. President Bush, who he's running against, he's stubborn. He's learned new information, and he's decided to stick with his initial conclusion or opinion. And I'm not a flip-flopper. I've learned more and I've become better. And so he saw the way that that the opposite side was able to control people's perspectives or the media coverage of him, and he tried to do it in the same way. And Jeb Bush actually had a press conference. This is before he was running for president, and said, "My brother's not stubborn," which I thought was very, very funny. But it didn't really take with the audience as much as it did with the two candidates saying, "No, you're stubborn, and I'm not a flip-flopper."
That windsurfing commercial, I still think is one of the best.
Yeah.
The music and everything, and the visual is just perfect. I mean, and I'm not sure what it is. So Trump is the master of this, right? Everyone has their nickname now, right? It's Crooked Hillary, it's Lying Ted, all the way down the line. That he paints with such a broad brush. He's able to get these things to stick. I mean, maybe he's saying what people are thinking, but he's not leveling a whole lot of direct attacks. A lot of them are vague, or and the same thing on the policy side of things. Not a lot of specific policies, but policies that are good, or policies that will be better. So again, I think a lot of painting with a broad brush so far, not a whole lot of policy specifics this cycle.
Right.
And it does seem that Hillary Clinton does try to talk about specifics. She has been accused, and there is some truth to this, that her specifics change depending on what audience she's in front of. If she's in front of a union, she's going to say pro-union things. If she's in front of another group, she'll say something that's more likely to get an applause from them. that's what politics are. So it's a little bit strange that she's held to a higher standard for that, but there is some truth that she does that. But whenever she tries to talk about a specific policy, a controversy erupts, whether it's coming from Trump's side or something with Benghazi or her email server. It doesn't seem like she's able to grab the media agenda or media attention the way that Trump has. He can keep people talking about what he wants to talk about in a way that she's not as successful at.
Or maybe not as visible.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's not as successful as not as visible, right? Candidates and presidents too like to play in the sandboxes that they're successful in, and for her that's not press conferences, it's not even necessarily one-on-one media interviews. It's in intimate settings with a medium-sized audience or a small group of voters where she can connect one-on-one. But those types of venues don't get the same kind of media coverage that a 5,000 person rally does, or this kind of firestorm of controversy, the back and forth between a reporter, a journalist, and a candidate like Trump does. So it's not surprising then that Trump would say, my rallies are huge, why am I not winning, right? I should be winning. I believe I'm winning. And the only solution or the only answer is that there's cheating, right? It's because he's discounting the importance of the one-on-one type of communication that Secretary Clinton's really good at that doesn't get a lot of attention.
Absolutely. I wonder how much of that is a gendered evaluation, and if this is a right moment to talk about those inequalities.
Sure. Yeah.
If you can't command a stadium, you're not fit to lead.
Right. Right.
Although there have been plenty of other presidents who have done better in more intimate settings and have not been the firebrand and have not been in front of the huge crowds and have been massively successful. I'm not so sure that she'll be judged on her crowds, because I'm not sure anybody's actually looking at it to that.
Right. True.
It'll be interesting, I think, too, to see what we actually end up with. It's been a year, I think, where the outsiders have been the most, or at least have gotten most of the attention, and if not outsiders, those with messages of that outside politics. And I know a handful of people have really identified a lack of trust in government as being a main driver of that. I don't know if you agree with that assessment or not. But I think it's interesting to think about what the people are actually looking for this year, and what they'll end up with. So what is driving the Trump movement? I don't know that it's a question with maybe what's driving the Clinton movement, but I think there is something, out of a field of how many were there? 17, 18. Yeah, out of a field that this is the choice.
Right.
And that it wasn't even really I thought it was going to be much closer.
Yeah.
Down the stretch.
True.
So
I think Trump is able to get people to agree with his feelings about things in a way that it's been very interesting to me that Secretary Clinton has been so vocal about her support of President Obama and talking about her role in his administration and wanting to continue the good work that he's done. I think that's a good tactic, but it's an interesting tactic. It's not something that a lot of people have used before. Vice President Gore tried to do that with President Clinton, say, oh, look at all the good that we've done in the last 8 years, I'd like to continue that. But when the other side is so against the establishment and against the inner circle of politics, it's been interesting to me that she's actually chosen that tactic among others.
True, although his popularity ratings are higher than they've been at almost any point since the beginning of the
54,
first term.
low 50s.
And relatively high compared to other presidents at this point in their presidencies. So it may be that she's looking at data and information that, makes her feel pretty confident that if she sticks with that, she's not only showing up her base, but also maybe reaching out to voters who might not have wanted to support her from the beginning, whether they're Sanders voters or whether they are more centrist Democrats.
There's two different narratives you can draw from the data, though, and Trump's going to sit there and say, if you look at the Gallup wrong track, right track question, 80% of Americans believe that we're on the wrong track. In the same poll that Gallup does, when they ask about presidential favorability, he's above 50%, and Clinton's going to say, we have a president who's above 50%. That's an endorsement of progressive, or at least democratic principles, and we need to stay the course. And I do wonder what's driving the wrong track question. There could be plenty of Democrats who look at a Trump candidacy and say that's the wrong track.
Sure.
But I think there are a lot of, and I love that, right? The ability to spin these, the data, if you torture them, will confess to anything. And you can look at the same sets of data, the same poll even. Something came out today. I think Texas, something, was it 44 or 45% of Texans said they want to secede if Hillary Clinton is elected. But Trump doesn't even have like 45% of support in the
That's
state,
right.
right? I think Clinton's laid down by five points in the state.
I think it's around
that's right,
44 to 38 right now.
I mean, that's unbelievable that certain states are already in play. Georgia's in play. South Carolina is
I've heard
2 to 5. I saw one in
That's unbelievable.
so I think we could see a very very unique electoral map, at least this year. It's
Absolutely.
not going to be the one that we've seen in 2000, 2004, 2008.
Yeah. And on this question of popularity ratings, I would note in the modern era, only one president has left office more popular than he arrived, and that's Bill Clinton.
Right.